Hi everyone, I am Surabhi and welcome to the Luchi and Muttons podcast. I run Luchi and Muttons Dog Behavior and Nutrition and I'm based out of Gurgaon in India. I work very closely with dog parents to help them meet their dogs' behavioral as well as nutritional needs. And I do this in a way that is holistic, scientifically backed, and with tons and tons of empathy. Welcome to episode 13. It's been a while since I recorded a new episode. Quite obviously, as always, a lot has happened in life and with Luchi, but we are trudging along, and I am back with a brand new episode. So, today's episode is a really interesting one. It's on counter surfing. And I actually came across a question in one of the dog groups that I'm part of. Somebody asked about what are the best tips to address counter surfing. And I thought that that's a great topic to do an episode on. Again, it's something that I myself have experienced with Luchi. And so I thought that I would talk a little bit about that. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar with what counter surfing is essentially your dog's trying to get onto counters. Could be kitchen counters, could be tables, could be any sort of surfaces to essentially access food that's available on the counter. Now, a lot of the times, people would assume that this kind of behavior is bad. It needs to be managed. It needs to be controlled. But I think that one of the most important things for us to understand is the why of the behavior and not label it as good or bad, right? So, like I said, dogs are likely to counter surf when they want to access food on a table or a countertop. And so, it's really not about them misbehaving. It's really as simple as they smell something and they want to access it, right? So Luchi, in fact, in her early days, used to counter surf a lot. So we used to leave her alone for a couple of hours at home, quite number of hours at home actually. And often I would come back home and find that our dinner was completely polished off because she would get into the kitchen and take down all the food that was kept on the counter. And even with some makeshift barriers, she would actually find a way to sort of get in and polish off food. And then it essentially hit me. If I don't keep the food on the counter, she won't be engaging in that behavior. And so we started putting all of the food in the microwave or the fridge, essentially places that she couldn't access. So I think one of the first things to do with counter surfing, really, in terms of management, right, is to make sure that you take away the opportunity for them to engage in that behavior. So you're taking away the opportunity from the dog to actually engage in counter surfing as a behavior. But that's what you do at a surface level, right? Below the surface, the focus really is on meeting the underlying need. Now, when dogs are counter surfing, there are a ton of needs that could be at play, right? One of them, quite obviously, is hunger. So they're obviously using their nose to find food and they're accessing it. So it's possible that they are essentially hungry, which is why they're counter surfing. And when we start talking about hunger, I think there are several different lines and angles that we can move in, right? I think one of the first things to think about is just the quantity of food that we're feeding our dogs. Is it the right quantity? Is it appropriate quantities? Have we worked with a nutrition consultant or even a vet to get a sense of how much exactly are we feeding our dogs, and is that enough for them, based on their weight, based on their size, based on their activity levels, based on a ton of other factors, right? So I think what becomes important is to make sure that we're not eyeballing the quantities that they need to eat, but they are actually eating appropriate quantities. So that's one part of the hunger game. The second part of hunger is also to consider the quality of diet that we are providing to our dogs. So, again, I see counter surfing in dogs who are either not eating a very high quality diet or their diet is actually just missing variety, right? So, again, we're talking a little bit about the quality of the diet. So, I think in cases where you do see that dogs are eating sufficient quantities of food, but are still counter surfing, I would again look at the quality of the diet. And I think anything to do with diet, honestly, I would work with an integrative vet or I would find a canine nutrition consultant in brackets like myself, to sort of support the dietary pieces there so that we can rule that out as one of the needs that the dog is trying to fulfill with this behavior. I think the second reason why dogs counter surf, and this I found to be true in Luci's case particularly, is when they are anxious or stressed out or excited, essentially when their cups are really full. And so, for example, in Luci's case, she was struggling with significant separation anxiety. And so, along with counter surfing, of course, she was engaging in a ton of other behaviors that were the hallmark of separation anxiety. And I think at that point in time, I didn't know enough about separation anxiety. So, I assumed that her counter surfing was just a way to, because she was bored or she wanted to do something interesting to do. I didn't sort of make that connection that she could be counter surfing also because her cup was full or she was feeling dysregulated. And I made that connection much, much later. So, again, this is something that I very actively tell dog parents that if their dogs are counter surfing, especially when they are home alone, it could be just one of the behaviors that they're engaging with as a way to sort of cope with that anxiety of being alone. But even if you sort of equate it to human beings, right? When human beings are stressed, when we are dysregulated, some of us do very actively seek food, and some of us can actually engage in a little bit of frenzied behavior around food. And it's so interesting that I'm talking about this because just a couple of days ago, I was feeling extremely dysregulated, and as a result, I was feeling hungry for several hours at a stretch. But I was also constantly opening up the kitchen cupboards. I was constantly opening up the fridge. I was scanning through delivery menus just to see what I could get my hands on and what I could eat. And again, that's an example of a dysregulated behavior. And so counter surfing does also fall under that in the case of our dogs. And so if our dogs are counter surfing and we've met the need for hunger, we don't think diet is an issue. But if we still find that they counter surfing, then I would consider emptying their cup or draining their cup in the moment, because food is just a way of calming themselves down, very much like they do with human beings as well. So I think those are some of the ways that I would really address the underlying need, because remember, when we simply focus on managing the behavior as a way to address what's happening in the short term, we don't necessarily address what's happening in the long term, right? And so, if you were to simply manage this behavior by not keeping food on the counter or on the table without addressing the underlying need, it's very likely that your dog could engage in other behaviors to meet that need. It's very likely that your dog's behaviors could escalate, because remember, those unmet needs are driving those behaviors. So, anytime you're addressing these kind of behaviors, it's very important for us to look at both the short term as well as the long term way to approach this. And so, while in the short term, you can look at management techniques, and in the case of counter surfing, it could look like making sure that your kitchen counters, your tables, or any places where your dogs are can access food easily, don't have food on them. But also in the long term, it becomes important to address the underlying needs, either hunger or helping your dog find better ways to cope and find regulation and calmness. Um, of course, I think what also becomes important in some cases is that if you don't want your dog entering the kitchen, for example, you can 100% place a baby gate or a barrier so that your dog can't get through. And that also adds as a block to kitchen counters. But again, what becomes really important for me to highlight is don't just don't just manage the environment without managing the dog's internal environment as well, right? I think the balance needs to be, how do we respond to both the external environment, but also how do we respond to the internal environment? And so those would be my tips to address counter surfing. Those listening in, if you have any other more tips, or if you have another way to approach counter surfing in a way that is holistic, that addresses both the internal and external environment for a dog, feel free to add those in the comments as well. And I'd love to sort of look through them. For dog parents who do struggle with counter surfing, I hope that this episode is helpful. And of course, at any point in time, if you need more help, feel free to reach out and we can chat about how I can support your dog and you on this journey of just understanding them better and helping them feel more comfortable and safe and regulated with you. That's it for episode 13 today. It's a short and sweet episode. I will be back with a new episode very soon, hopefully. I am recording a few different conversations with very interesting people over the next few weeks, and so I should be dropping those episodes soon enough. But thank you so much for listening in. If you have any feedback, if you would like me to cover a few topics, short topics like these, feel free to add those in the comments as well, or drop me an email at surabhi@lucianmuttons.com, and I will do my best to address them. Till the next episode, thank you so much for listening in once again, and lots of love to you from Luci, Mutton from Above, and me.